Welcome back to the table. As always, I'm your host, Chad Tafts. Before we get started, I want to give a quick shout out to Alpha Subs. As I've been preparing to get back into Army shape, I've partnered with them as an ambassador. If you're working on your own fitness goals, you'll find a link and my discount code in the description. Now, let's pull up a chair. Last week, we talked about the standard. We talked about how every man has standards, whether we realize it or not. We talked about how our goals aren't something we rise to, we fall to our standards. Because our standards become our habits become our character, and eventually our character becomes our legacy. But today, I want to ask you a different question. If we know what our standards should be, why don't we live up to them? Why do we keep putting things off? Why do we stay where we are even when we know we're capable of more? I think the answer is something every one of us wrestles with: comfort. Comfort isn't always a bad thing. There's nothing wrong with resting after a long day. There's nothing wrong with enjoying time with your family. There's nothing wrong with slowing down every once in a while. But comfort has a way of quietly becoming permanent. And before we know it, comfort becomes an excuse. It tells us we'll start tomorrow. It tells us one more day won't matter. It tells us to stay where we are familiar instead of stepping into the life that we're capable of living. Man. The problem is, comfort rarely feels dangerous. It feels safe. And that's exactly why it's so hard to recognize. So today we're going to talk about the cost of comfort, what comfort quietly steals from us, why growth almost always feels uncomfortable, and how the life you've been hoping for may be waiting just outside your comfort zone. So come on in, grab a drink, get comfortable, because today we're going to talk about why staying comfortable might be the most uncomfortable decision you ever made. And come on and pull up a chair. I think one of the reasons comfort is so difficult to fight is because comfort doesn't feel like the enemy. It feels good. It feels safe. It feels familiar. And most of us naturally move toward things that make us feel safe. Think about it. If you have the choice between doing something difficult and doing something easy, which one are you more likely to choose? If the choice between getting up early to work out or staying in bed for another hour, that bed is going to make a pretty convincing argument. If you have the choice between having a difficult conversation or pretending everything is fine is going to feel easier. If you have the choice between applying for the job or staying where you are feels safer. And that's the problem. Comfort doesn't usually tell you, "Hey man, don't get better. Don't become better." It tells you you're good where you're at. And that's a much harder voice to recognize because sometimes you actually are tired. Sometimes you really do need to take a break. You need that rest. And I mean, that's part of being human. The problem is when the exception becomes a standard, when one off day becomes a habit, when one uncomfortable conversation becomes months of silence, when "I'll do it tomorrow" becomes the answer to everything. That's when comfort starts costing you something. And I've had to confront that myself, especially with everything I'm doing right now to prepare for the Army. There are plenty of days where the comfortable choice is obvious. I could stay in bed. I can tell myself, man, I'll just work out later. I could tell myself, I'll eat better tomorrow. I could tell myself, man, I have plenty of time. And honestly, those excuses don't sound crazy. They sound reasonable. That's what makes them dangerous because nobody has to convince you to do something terrible. Sometimes all you have to do is convince yourself that you don't need to do something difficult today, but there's always a tomorrow. At least that's what we tell ourselves. Tomorrow I'll start. Tomorrow I'll work out. Tomorrow I'll make the phone call. Tomorrow I'll apologize. Tomorrow I'll work on my marriage. Tomorrow I'll start building the business. Tomorrow I'll become the man I keep saying I want to become. And eventually, you wake up and you realize you've spent months, maybe even years, waiting for tomorrow. And I think one of the biggest traps comfort creates for us is it makes staying the same feel harmless. You look at one decision and think, man, it's only today. But your life isn't built by one decision. It's built by thousands of them. And every time you choose comfort, you're reinforcing something. You're teaching yourself, this is what I do when things get difficult. But the opposite is also true. Every time you choose to do something that's uncomfortable, you teach yourself that you can handle it. You get up when you don't want to. You have the conversation you're afraid to have. You do the workout. You ask for help. You try something you've never done before. And slowly, you become someone who doesn't need comfort to feel okay. You become someone who can handle discomfort. That's a completely different kind of confidence. Because eventually, you stop asking, man, how can I make this easier? And you start asking, is this worth doing? And if the answer is yes, you do it. Even when it's hard, even when you're tired, even when you're scared. Because comfort isn't the enemy. But if you're not careful, it can become the thing standing between you and the man you want to be, the man that you're trying to become. And that's where we have to start asking ourselves a harder question. Not am I comfortable, but what is my comfort costing me? I think something has a really interest I think comfort is has a really interesting way of talking to us. It doesn't usually say don't do it. It doesn't say give up. It doesn't even say you can. Instead it says tomorrow. And I think that's one of the most dangerous words we can tell ourselves. Tomorrow I'll start. Tomorrow I'll work out. Tomorrow I'll eat better. Tomorrow I'll make the phone call. Tomorrow I'll have that conversation. Tomorrow I'll finally work on the thing I've been talking about for months. Now tomorrow feels harmless because tomorrow isn't today. There's no pressure, no discomfort, no consequences that we can see yet. So we tell ourselves we'll get to it, just not right now. And then tomorrow comes, and comfort gives us another excuse. Man, I'm tired. I've got too much going on. Today isn't a good day. Man, I'll start Monday. And Monday comes, and suddenly there's another reason. Maybe you've done this. I know I have. I've lost track of how many times I've told myself I'll start Monday. Whether it was working out, eating better, getting organized, working on something for the podcast, or just finally taking care of something I'd been putting off. Monday became this magical day where apparently everything was going to change. But Monday isn't magical, it's just another day. And if I don't change what I'm doing, Monday is going to look exactly like Sunday. And that's one of the lies comfort tells us. It convinces us that our circumstances need to change before we do. We tell ourselves when life calms down, when I have more money, when the kids are older, when work isn't so busy, when I have more time, when I feel motivated, then I'll do it. But there's always going to be something. There's always going to be another responsibility, another bill, another busy week, another reason why today isn't the perfect day. And if we're waiting for life to become perfectly comfortable before we start doing uncomfortable things, we're probably going to wait forever. And I think another lie that comfort tells us is that you deserve a break. And sometimes you do. You worked hard, you're tired, you need to rest. There's nothing wrong with that. But there's a difference between resting because you need to recover and resting because you don't want to do something difficult. Those two things can look exactly the same from the outside. But you know the difference. You know when you're genuinely exhausted. And you know when you're just trying to avoid something. That's where we have to be honest with ourselves. Because comfort is really good at turning avoidance into self care. Sometimes I need to rest really means, man, I don't want to do this. Sometimes I'll deal with it tomorrow really means I just don't want to deal with this today. Sometimes it's not the right time really means, man, I'm afraid. And sometimes I've got too much going on really means this isn't a priority right now. And that's a hard thing to admit. But honesty is important here because you can't change something you refuse to acknowledge. And I'm not saying this to beat anybody up. I'm saying it because I've had to recognize it in myself. There are things I've put off and I'm still putting off because they are difficult. Things I've delayed because I didn't feel ready. Things I've convinced myself could wait. And eventually I had to ask myself, how long am I going to keep waiting? Because comfort doesn't care about your goals. It doesn't care about the man you say you want to become. It only cares about what feels easiest right now. And if you keep listening to that voice, Eventually, the excuse becomes the habit becomes the standard, and the standard becomes your life. That's why we have to recognize the lies when we hear them, because comfort will always have another reason, another tomorrow, another Monday, another excuse. And eventually, you have to decide that tomorrow isn't coming to save you. You have to start today. There's something interesting about comfort. It doesn't usually send you a bill right away. You make the comfortable decision today, and everything seems fine. You skip the workout, nothing happens. You sleep in, nothing happens. You put off that conversation, nothing happens. You decide not to apply for the job, nothing happens. You tell yourself you'll start tomorrow, and tomorrow comes, and still nothing seems to happen. That's what makes comfort so dangerous. The consequences aren't usually immediate, they show up later, sometimes much later. And by the time they do, you may not even remember the decision that created them. Think about your health. One missed workout isn't going to change your life. One unhealthy meal isn't going to destroy your progress. One night of staying up too late isn't going to ruin your sleep. But what happens when 1 becomes 10? When 10 becomes 50? When skipping the workout becomes your normal routine? Eventually, you look in the mirror and wonder, how the hell did I get here? And it wasn't one decision, it was hundreds of small decisions that felt like harmless at the time. That's the price of comfort. And it doesn't just affect our health, it affects our confidence. Because every time you tell yourself you're going to do something and then you don't, you teach yourself something. You teach yourself that your word isn't enough to make you act. You say, man, I'm going to wake up early. Then you hit snooze. I'm going to go work out. Then you skip it. I'm going to make that phone call. And then you don't. I'm going to finally start. And then you push it another day. Eventually, it's not just the thing you're avoiding. You start losing trust in yourself. And I think that's one of the most expensive things comfort can take from us. Because confidence isn't just believing that you're capable. Sometimes confidence comes from knowing, man, if I say I'm going to do it, man, I'm going to freaking do it. That's something I'm working on myself right now, especially with getting ready to go back in the Army. I'm not just trying to lose weight. I'm not just trying to get into better physical shape. I'm trying to prove something to myself. That when I say I'm going to do something, I can follow through. Because there are going to be plenty of uncomfortable days. There are going to be days where I'm tired, days where I don't feel like running, days where I don't feel like working out, days where I would much rather sit on the couch and relax. But the comfortable choice isn't going to get me where I want to go. And that's true outside of fitness too. Comfort can cost you opportunities. Maybe you wanted to apply for a different job, but you were afraid you weren't going to get it. So you just stayed where you were. Maybe you wanted to start a business, but you were afraid people would laugh at you. So you never started. Maybe you wanted to repair a relationship, but you didn't want to have that uncomfortable conversation. So you just said, forget it and stayed quiet. Maybe you wanted to become a better husband, a better father, a better friend, but changing your behavior meant admitting some things needed to change. And that's uncomfortable. So you waited. The opportunity doesn't always disappear immediately. Sometimes it just gets further away. And eventually, you look back and realize that you weren't actually protecting yourself. You were protecting your comfort. And personally, that's the part that scares me because comfort can cost you things you can't get back: time, opportunities, relationships, health, your confidence, growth, and sometimes years. That's why I keep coming back to this question. What is my comfort costing me? Not what is it costing me today? What could it cost me 6 months from now, a year from now, 5 years from now? Because the comfortable decision might feel like the right decision today, but that doesn't mean it's the right decision for your future. And eventually, every one of us has to decide what matters more: feeling comfortable right now or becoming the man we keep saying we want to be. Now it's time for our roundtable reflection. So before we move on, I want you to take a minute. If you're driving, keep your eyes on the road. If you're at home, maybe set your phone down for a second, because I don't want you to answer these questions out loud. but I do want you to answer them honestly. Think about your life right now. Where have you gotten comfortable? Maybe it's your health. Maybe you know you should be taking better care of yourself, but you've gotten used to putting it off. Maybe it's your marriage. Maybe there's something you need to work on, but having that conversation feels uncomfortable. Maybe it's your career. Maybe you've been thinking about making a change, but staying where you are feels safer. Maybe it's your friendships. Maybe there's someone you should reach out to, but you keep telling yourself you'll do it later. Or maybe it's something completely different. So ask yourself, what have I been putting off because it makes me uncomfortable? Take a second with that. Now ask yourself something harder. What has that comfort cost me? Has it already cost you time, an opportunity, a relationship, your health, your confidence? Maybe you don't even know yet. Maybe the cost hasn't shown up. But if you keep making the same comfortable choices, where will they take you? Think about that. If you changed nothing, if you kept doing exactly what you're doing right now, where would you be a year from now? Would you be proud of that? Would you be closer to the man you want to become? Or would you still be saying, I'll start tomorrow? Now, I want you to think about one thing you've been avoiding, not 10, just one. What is it? And more importantly, what would happen if you finally did it? Maybe it wouldn't go perfectly. Maybe you'd fail. Maybe the conversation wouldn't go the way you hoped. Maybe the workout would be difficult. Maybe you'd hear no. But what if it went right? What if taking that first uncomfortable step changed something? You won't know until you take it. So here's the question I want you to carry with you. Are you protecting your peace or are you protecting your comfort? Because those aren't always the same thing. Take a moment. Think about it. All right, let's get back to this conversation. I think one of the hardest things for us to accept is that growth usually doesn't feel good while it's happening. We like the idea of growth. We like talking about becoming stronger, becoming healthier, becoming more disciplined, becoming a better husband, a better father, a better friend, a better man in general. But we don't always like what those things require from us because growth requires change, and change is uncomfortable. Think about the first workout after you've been out of shape for a while. Your body doesn't feel stronger, it feels worse. You're tired, you're sore, you're breathing hard. You might even wonder, why the hell am I doing this? But that's the point. Your body is being asked to do something it hasn't been used to doing. And over time it'll adapt. It gets stronger. And the same thing happens mentally. The first time you have a difficult conversation, it's uncomfortable. Your heart might be racing. You might not know exactly what to say. You might be afraid of how the other person will respond. But then you have the conversation and you realized, damn, I survived that. Maybe it didn't go perfectly. Maybe it wasn't even the outcome you wanted. But you did something you were afraid to do. And now you're a little stronger because of it. That's how growth works. You don't become comfortable first and then become courageous. You become courageous by doing uncomfortable things. I think about that with getting ready for the army. I'm not going to magically wake up one morning and suddenly be in army shape. There's no switch I can flip, no shortcut. I've got to do the work. I have to get up when I don't want to. I have to walk when I'd rather sit down. I have to train when I'm tired. I have to make better choices with what I eat. And some days it's going to suck. There's no way around it. But discomfort isn't the problem. Discomfort is part of the process. And I think we sometimes look at discomfort as a warning sign. We think, man, if this feels hard, maybe I'm doing something wrong. But most of the time, the exact opposite is true. The fact that it's difficult means you're finally doing something different. You're finally pushing beyond the version of yourself that you've been comfortable being. And that's important because you can't build a new life while constantly protecting the old version of yourself. If you want to become healthier, something must change. If you want to have a stronger marriage, something must change. If you want to be more present with your kids, something must change. If you want a different career, something must change. If you want to become more disciplined, something must change. And change usually means doing something you're not used to doing. Maybe it's getting up earlier. Maybe it means putting your phone down. Maybe it means admitting where you've been wrong. Maybe it means asking for help. Maybe it means saying no to something you really want. Maybe it's saying yes to something that scares you. None of those things are comfortable, but they're incredibly valuable. I've started looking at discomfort differently. Instead of asking, how do I get out of this? I'm trying to start asking, what can this teach me? What can I learn from being tired? What can I learn from struggling? What can I learn from failing? What can I learn from being uncomfortable? Because if every difficult moment becomes something I have to escape, I'm never going to become stronger. I'll just keep returning to the same comfortable place. And that's not where I want to live. I don't want to spend my life avoiding anything that makes me uncomfortable. Because some of the most important things in my life are going to require me to be uncomfortable. Being a better husband requires uncomfortable conversations. Being a better father requires patience when I'm exhausted. Becoming physically stronger requires me to push my body. Becoming mentally stronger requires facing things I'd rather avoid. Becoming the man I want to be requires me to leave behind some of the things that I've used to keep me comfortable. And I think that's the part we have to remember. Discomfort isn't always a sign of that something is wrong. Sometimes it's a sign that something is changing. Growth and comfort rarely sit at the same table. And if we're serious about becoming better men, eventually we're going to have to choose which one matters more. I think one of the biggest changes we can make is changing the way we look at discomfort. Because for a long time, I think a lot of us are taught to avoid it. If something is difficult, find an easier way. If something makes you uncomfortable, walk away. If you're tired, rest. If you're afraid, don't do it. And sometimes those are the right decisions. But if we make them every single time, we never learn what we're capable of. We never find out how strong we actually are. And eventually, we start believing that discomfort itself is the problem. And I don't think it is. I think sometimes discomfort is the price of admission. If you want to become stronger, you have to be willing to struggle. If you want to become healthier, you have to be willing to be uncomfortable. If you want a better marriage, you have to be willing to have conversations that aren't always easy. If you want to become a better father, you have to be willing to be patient when you're exhausted. If you want to become a better man, you must be willing to confront parts of yourself that you don't necessarily like. And that's not a punishment, that's growth. And I think one of the best ways to start doing that is to stop asking yourself, do I feel like doing this? Because if that's the question, there are going to be a lot of days where the answer is no. Instead, ask yourself, what does the man I'm trying to become do? That's a different question. The man I'm trying to become doesn't always feel motivated, but he still gets up. The man I'm trying to become doesn't always feel confident, but he still has to have the conversation. The man I'm trying to become doesn't always feel strong, but he still does what needs to be done. And that's where I think standards come back into this. We talked about standards in the last episode. A standard isn't something you follow only when you feel like it. It's something you decide beforehand. You decide, this is who I am. And then you let your actions catch up. That's what I'm trying to do right now. I'm trying to build the standard before I get there. Because I don't want to have to wait until someone else is telling me what to do. I don't want someone standing over me telling me to work out. I don't want someone telling me to get up. I don't want someone to remind me of why I started. I want to become the kind of man who expects more from himself. And that's uncomfortable. But I'm starting to realize that that's okay. Because every time I do something uncomfortable, it gets a little less uncomfortable. The first workout is hard, then the next one is hard. Then eventually working out becomes normal. The first time you have that difficult conversation, your heart might be racing. But eventually you realize, man, I can have hard conversations. The first time you say no to something that isn't good for you, it might feel weird. But eventually you stop needing everyone else's approval. That's how we build resilience. We don't build it by avoiding difficult things. We build it by facing them head on, one uncomfortable decision at a time. And I'm not saying you have to go completely change your entire life tomorrow. You don't have to wake up at 4 a.m. You don't have to run 10 miles. You don't have to solve every single problem that you've ever had. Start smaller than that. Do one thing that you don't want to do because you know it's good for you. Make that phone call, take the walk, have the conversation, put the phone down, get out of bed, do the work, and then do it again tomorrow. Because eventually, you stop being the man who's constantly trying to escape discomfort, and you become the man who can walk into discomfort and say, man, I can handle this. And that's a powerful place to be because life isn't always going to be comfortable. There are going to be hard seasons, there are going to be failures, there are going to be losses, there are going to be conversations you don't want to have. And if we've spent our entire lives running from discomfort, those moments are going to break us. But if we've practiced facing it, they still might hurt. They still might be difficult. But at the end of the day, we'll know we can get through them. And that's what I want. Not a life without discomfort. A life where discomfort doesn't control me. Because the goal isn't to become comfortable all the time. The goal is to become strong enough to keep moving even when I'm not. I think at some point we have to stop asking ourselves whether something is comfortable and start asking whether it matters. Because comfort isn't always the wrong choice. Sometimes you do need rest. Sometimes you do need to slow down. Sometimes you need to take a day off. Sometimes the healthiest thing you can do is absolutely nothing. And there's nothing wrong with that. The problem comes when comfort becomes the deciding factor in every decision we make. When we start asking what's easiest instead of what's right, what's more comfortable instead of what actually needs to be done. How can I avoid this instead of how can I grow through this? Those questions lead to completely different lives. And I think that's where purpose comes in because purpose gives you a reason to do the things that aren't comfortable. If you know why you're doing something, discomfort becomes easier to accept. That's something I've been thinking about a lot as I prepare to go back in the Army. There are going to be plenty of things that I don't enjoy. There are going to be tons of early mornings, hard workouts, long days, things I'm going to be told to do that I probably won't feel like doing. There will be moments where being comfortable sounds pretty damn good. But I know why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I chose this. I'm doing it because I want to become stronger. I'm doing it because I want to prove to myself that I can finish what I started. I'm doing it because I want to take care of my family. And I'm doing it because there's a version of myself on the other side of this discomfort that I want to meet. That's purpose. And I think we can find the same thing in the rest of our lives. Maybe your purpose is becoming a better husband. Then sometimes you got to put your phone down, even when you'd rather scroll. You've got to listen, even when you're tired. You have to have the uncomfortable conversation, even when you'd rather avoid it. Maybe your purpose is being a better father. Then sometimes you have to put your own frustration aside. You've got to sit down on the floor and play. You have to listen to the same story for the 800 millionth time. You have to correct your child when it's easier to let it go. Maybe your purpose is building something, a business, a career, a healthier life, a stronger relationship. And there are going to be days where you don't feel like doing the work. And that's all right. You don't have to feel like doing it. You just have to decide whether it's worth doing anyway. Because purpose doesn't eliminate discomfort. It gives discomfort meaning. And that's a huge difference. Especially when you're working towards something that matters. The hard days aren't necessarily signs that you should stop. Sometimes they're just part of the road. And I think that's where we get confused. We think a difficult season means we're on the wrong path. And sometimes it means we're finally moving. So maybe the question isn't, how do I make my life more comfortable? Maybe the better question is, what am I willing to be uncomfortable for? What matters enough to you that you're willing to struggle for it? Who matters enough? What future matters enough? What version of yourself matters enough? Because whatever your answer is, that's probably where your purpose lives. And once you know that, the uncomfortable choices become a little easier. Not easy, just easier. You can wake up early because you know what you're waking up for. You can make that difficult phone call because you know what the relationship means to you. You can put in the work because you know what you're building. You can say no to something because you know what you're saying yes to. And that's the trade. Every time you choose purpose over comfort, you're giving something up, but you're also gaining something. Discipline, confidence, experience, strength, self respect, progress. And eventually, you're going to look back and realize something. You're going to realize that things that once felt uncomfortable have become normal in your life. The workout became routine. The early mornings became normal. The hard conversations became easier. The discipline became part of who you are. And that's what we've been talking about throughout the last 2 episodes. Your standards tell you who you're trying to become, but your willingness to leave comfort behind is what allows you to actually become him. So don't spend your life trying to eliminate every uncomfortable thing. Some of the best things in your life are going to require you to be uncomfortable first. Choose the marriage, choose your kids, choose your health, choose your purpose, choose the future that you're building. And when comfort tells you, hey man, come on, lay back down, stay here, remember, you didn't come this far just to stay comfortable. Before we wrap up today's conversation, it's time for this week's challenge. And this is going to be another simple one. I don't want you to completely change your life this week. I don't want you to make a list of 85 things that you're going to try and fix. I want you to choose one thing that you've been avoiding because it's uncomfortable. Just one. Maybe it's getting back into the gym. Maybe it's going for that walk that you've been putting off. Maybe it's getting up earlier. Maybe it's finally making that phone call. Maybe it's having a conversation with your wife that you've been avoiding. Maybe it's asking for help. Maybe it's applying for that job. Maybe it's finally starting something you've been talking about for months. Whatever it is, choose one and then do it. Not when you feel motivated, not when the timing is perfect, not next Monday. Start today. Because the point isn't to prove that you're suddenly disciplined. The point is to prove to yourself that discomfort doesn't control you. You can still be tired and still get up. You can be nervous and still make that phone call. You can be afraid and still have the conversation. You can be uncomfortable and still move forward. And here's the important part. Don't just do it once. Do it again. If your challenge is working out, do it tomorrow too. If it's getting up earlier, do it tomorrow too. If it's having the conversation, don't stop doing the work after the conversation is over. Because we're not trying to create one impressive moment. We're trying to build a new standard. Last week, we talked about the standards. This week, we're putting that standard to work. So find one place where you've been choosing comfort and choose differently. You don't got to change everything. You just have to take one step outside the comfortable version of your life. And when you do, pay attention to how you feel afterward. Because you might realize something. The thing you were afraid of, that would be so uncomfortable, wasn't nearly as bad as staying exactly where you were. So this week, choose one uncomfortable thing. Do it. Then do it again. And show yourself that you're capable of. Show yourself what you're capable of when comfort doesn't make that decision. Now, as we close today, I want to leave you with one final thought. Comfort isn't the enemy. We all need rest. We all need time to slow down. We all need moments where we can breathe and just enjoy the life that we're building. But comfort was never meant to become the place where we stop growing. Because sometimes the thing standing between you and the life you want isn't failure. It isn't a lack of opportunity. It isn't even the lack of ability. Sometimes it's simply that staying where you are feels easier. And I think we all have to be honest about that, because the comfortable decision today might feel like the right decision. But what happens when you make that same decision tomorrow, and then the next day, and then the next year? Eventually, those decisions become part of your life. So don't be afraid of discomfort. Don't run from every difficult thing, because some of the most important things you'll ever do will be uncomfortable at first. The conversation, the workout, the apology, the early mornings, the risk, the first step. And one day, you may look back and realize that the moments you wanted to avoid were the moments that changed you the most. The goal isn't to build a life where you're always comfortable. It's to build a life that is worth being uncomfortable for. So this week, choose purpose over comfort. Choose growth over convenience. Choose the man you're becoming over the man who's comfortable staying where he is. Thank you for pulling up a chair with me today. If this episode challenges you, I'd appreciate if you follow the Roundtable for Men on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, or wherever you're listening. And if you know another man who's gotten a little too comfortable, share this episode with them. Because sometimes one conversation is all it takes to make somebody look at their life differently. Thanks again for pulling up a chair. I'll see y'all next time at the Roundtable for Men.